and welcome to the Catholic Homeschool Podcast. And I am so thrilled today to be able to invite my dear friend Monica Speach with us. Um, I think this particular time of year is an important time for us to focus in on the virtues. And what better way than to have a discussion with the author of an incredible program that has helped my children, has helped hundreds of families around, called the Program to Achieve Character Education. But more than that, Monica reached out to me because she has a special patron, someone she loves, someone that's been guiding her, who they made a movie of right now. So I'm thrilled to welcome Monica. How are you today?
Great, great. Always excited to talk about my buddy, Mother Cabrini.
Yes. So you reached out to me, I know, about Mother Cabrini, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but I think there are a few, yes, perhaps a few. And in our Catholic homeschool community, we have been growing by leaps and bounds, and especially brand new families who have little children, even just preschool age, they're just curious and they may not know about you. So let's begin by tell your story about maybe your homeschooling, your
Okay.
growing up, and in particular, your passion for the virtues.
Okay. So, growing up, I went to Catholic school and just learned about the virtues through the nuns and just through everything. And then I went to public high school. I went to college, went to a Catholic college that wasn't particularly Catholic. And then I had my children and I started I started homeschooling them. And I was really impressed with, this book by William Bennett, The Book of Virtues. And I always have it near me. um, I was looking at it and I realized that I really wanted to stress not only the virtues with my kids, but also good literature, because that's what this is all about. And my father was a reading specialist and always just focused on good literature. So I read it and I thought, oh, well, it's 10 virtues, 10 months that we homeschool usually. So I developed the program for my kids. And then some of my homeschool friends heard about it and they're like, what are you doing with this? And I was like, oh, I'm just teaching it to my kids. Like, you're crazy. You share it. So that started that whole thing. So then just from then on, I've just been so much, you can't help but once you get involved with the virtues, everything you see, it's like, this is an example of virtue. This is an example of not a virtue, which is very helpful when you're teaching kids, because little kids, they don't want to get in trouble. And then if you talk about a little kid who maybe got in trouble, did something wrong, and you say, see, this is because he lacked that virtue, or didn't know enough about it. And they love that because it's like a safe. I'm going to watch this child, or I'm going to read about this, and then we're going to talk about it. So, and then actually during the pandemic, my son had the misfortune of coming home for a couple months. I'm kidding, but he came home with us for a couple of months, and I was like, hey, how'd you like to help me develop some workbooks for like junior high? And that's when I started my heroes, and that's behind me. So I have my H4 and my, which is Heroes in History, Heroes at Home, and what I call RABA, Read a Hero, Be a Hero. And that was just so much fun doing all the research for that. And then I got to choose like some of my favorite people and people no one ever, heard about, because I just feel that heroes are obviously a big part of virtues. And the heroes that I see our children in society today looking up to are not heroes at all.
So let's dig a little first deep into what is a virtue. We talk about virtues. Are like Catholic virtues different than what the secular world? What are we talking? Because I always was intrigued about, you say it's a program to achieve character education.
Right.
I know that the secular world talks about character. How
Mhm.
does that translate to virtues, and in particular the Catholic sensibility of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's about modeling good behavior. It's about knowing the difference between right and wrong, and being willing to make sacrifices, and being it's like a little voice. Virtues are like a little voice in your head telling you, this is right, or this is wrong. So, it's a lifelong pursuit. You want to always be studying the virtues, thinking about the virtues. But what we want to do for kids is to instill it in them when they're very young. I like to call it like a stamp that's on them. And then when they're faced with a situation, they're like, okay, this is virtuous. This is not virtuous. And I don't want to go down that road.
Right.
So so that's what
Yeah.
I consider
And so,
virtue, and Catholicism works beautifully in that because it's,
right.
modeling the commandments and Jesus's teachings. So then children go to mass and they hear the gospel and they hear the homily, and it reinforces the virtues. And then they read good literature and that reinforces it.
Yeah, I
So
mean, we're all called to holiness. Part of that call is developing, as you said, those habits. And
yeah,
I like to think that the secular world always talks about characteristics, and they're kind of more wishy-washy. So, you know what I'm saying?
right.
I feel like virtues kind of, when we talk, and what are some of those virtues? Maybe you can mention a few. And
Yes,
well, I'd love to hear
self-discipline, which is one of
one.
the most important ones.
Yeah, pick one and then say how, what I love is the manifold, the way you get this accessibility to those virtues through a variety of means. How does,
Right.
explain a little bit about that?
Right. So there are 10 virtues in Bennett's book, and I took those 10 virtues: self-discipline, work, perseverance, faith, trust, courage, compassion, friendship, loyalty, responsibility, and honesty. I think I got all of them. And first, of course, define what they are. And I'm a big quote collector. I've been collecting quotes since I was a kid. So I always have quotes about that reinforce the virtue. I have Bible passages, again, reinforcing the virtue, just demonstrating them. And then stories from the Book of Virtues and the Moral Compass, which is the companion book for a little bit older children. And then we have discussion questions, and we have writing examples. And then I have an enrichment area that just is sort of extra activities: watch a movie, do an experiment, music, music that ties into it, or the composer of that music who demonstrated a particular virtue. So that's why
Yeah. So
my
it's
manual is kind of thick.
and it also encompasses every aspect of our lives.
Right.
So yeah. So in particular, when you say you want to teach children, you talk about stories and literature. So there's
Mhm.
also, isn't there like book selections in
I'm
there as
sorry.
well?
Yes. How did I skip my book selection? That's the part that I had the most fun
Yes.
researching. Yes. Thank you, Paula. Yes. So I have a fairly exhaustive list of
Yeah.
books
Yeah.
that you can get from your library, or, use bookstores, which is my go-to. Um, and those are really fun. And then, of course, parents can turn that into a book report or just a discussion. And yeah, so then I have a lesson plan bundle for a couple books that I chose. And I really should do more of those, but I'm so involved in so many things, as always. I was
Yeah.
just listening to
Right.
someone talking about retirement, and he was saying,
What's
you,
that?
you know, people shouldn't retire if they don't, it's just not a good idea. And I'm
No.
thinking, I can't imagine, I retired from certain work, but then all these other
Right.
things are replacing it.
Right. And we call it the new act. It's like a second act, a third act. I know I'm like on my fourth act.
I think I'm on my third. Yeah.
Exactly. So, but getting back to the stories, I
Mhm.
mean, one of the things I also loved about it too is you also highlight saints that in particular either are exemplary, but
Right.
also who struggled
Right.
because it's
Right.
that's so human.
Yes. Yes. And so when I was looking at that, during the pandemic, I was thinking, these are our heroes. Like, I guess that's what makes us that particularly Catholic, are the saints, and the Blessed Virgin Mary, who is a big part also of my program. And so I thought, okay, those are our heroes, but then there's secular heroes too. So that's what I tried to do with my two workbooks, is, weave in the saints with the regular people, the people from history, just ordinary people. And I found so much out there. I could have written, 20.
But it's true. And who are our children looking up to? Who are they trying to find those examples? And I really do believe that children feel really young, and especially as they get into the teenage years, they are looking for, what is my mission? What is God calling me?
Right.
and this ability to kind of walk in the shoes of those people that had those virtuous behaviors, either through vicariously through their story.
Right.
So speaking of story, there is this movie out. Let's talk about Mother Cabrini.
Rini,
Yes, yes, yes. It's Francesca, right? Cabrini.
Francesca, someone named
Yes.
Paola knows
So
how to pronounce.
Monica and I, these Italian girls, it really resonates. I am also originally from New York.
And you're from New York.
This story is really special because my family emigrated. They were not that first wave of Italians that went in necessarily. My family emigrated after World War II. You know, my aunt married a GI soldier and
Mhm.
sponsored her mom and my dad, who was only 18 at the time. Devastation going on in Italy after the war. So they're part of the other wave of Italians, but many of the things that they experienced coming into New York are very similar to what happened when Mother Cabrini comes on the scene. So why is Mother Cabrini so important to Monica? And let's dive into her.
Okay. Well, actually, I went to the Cabrini Shrine in New York City a couple of
Mhm.
weeks ago, and I met the director because last fall I was in Italy visiting my cousins who live outside of Milan. And my son had a conference over there, and he's like, "Oh, did I tell him going to Milan in October?" And I'm like, "Yeah, did I tell you I'm coming too?" So he's like, "What?" And I was like, "Dad and I are coming." So he's like, "Oh my gosh." So he went to his conference, then we picked him up and we stayed with our cousins. And so they
Sweet.
said, every time I go to Italy, they say, "Where do you want to go?" And they say, Lago Maggiore, whatever. And they always want to take us to a lake, which is wonderful. But I said, "I want to go to Codogno." And they just looked at me and they said, "Why do you want to go to Codogno?" And I said, and they said, "You know what Codogno's famous for?" And I said, "No." I said, "Well, I know why I think it's famous." They said it was the first COVID death.
Wow.
That's Codogno,
Really?
the city. So I said, "Well, I want to go because it was Mother Cabrini's first convent, and that's where she founded her order."
Wow.
And do you know that my cousins did not know who St. Francis Cabrini was? She is not well known in Italy, which
In
just,
Italy.
but I was talking to the director at the shrine. So we got a tour in English, which was wonderful, of, oh my gosh, of her convent. And I was like,
Wow.
I was floating. It was really wonderful. And we met this beautiful nun, Sister Teresina, who actually is American. And she said, "When you go back to the United States, you have to go to the shrine."
Wow.
Excuse me. And I said, "Okay." And she said, "Say hello to the director." So I get to the shrine and I said, "Are you the director?" "Yes." I said, "Sister Teresina said hello." And she got very excited. "How do you know? You've been to Codogno?" And I'm like, "Yes." So this has been, so
Whole
the
Catholic world, Monica.
small. So what happened was, when I was in 7th grade, I had to choose my confirmation saint. I was a huge fan of St. Francis of Assisi. And so I asked Sister Rose Ostina, one of my favorite nuns. I said, "I would like to take," she said, "You can't take a boy's name. Can't have a boy saint." So I was like, "Oh, please, sister, please." And she said, "No, why don't you go home, think about it." And I was just, so I went home and I said to my mother, "I can't take St. Francis of Assisi." And she said, "Why don't you take St. Francis Cabrini?
Mhm.
And your aunt Francesca could be your sponsor."
Wow.
So I was like, "I don't know anything about her." My mother said, "Oh my gosh, she's wonderful." First of all, my mother goes, "She's Italian, first of all." And she's like, and so my grandparents, my grandmother knew some of the priests who came over
Wow.
same time, the Scalabrini priests. So
Wow.
my mother had a real connection with Mother Cabrini,
Mhm.
which I had never
Mhm.
heard. I was only 11 or 12. So I kind of reluctantly, not super passionately, took the name Francis. Okay. So that's 1970. So you fast forward to 1983. And I'm getting my master's in education. And because I decided I wanted to be a Spanish teacher, but at the time, at Seton Hall University near my house, they
Yes.
had they were going to offer me a free education, but I had to study English as a second language. So I thought, all right, well, I'll get qualified in both, and that, whatever. I never even heard of ESL. So I started teaching ESL, which is English to foreign, it's a second language to
Yes.
foreign
Yes.
people. And second month I'm there, I'm throwing a Halloween party for these are college kids. I invite my parents to come. I still don't know why I did that, but anyway, I'm like, "Mom, Dad, come to this party. I want you to meet my students."
Holy
So
Spirit moments, we call those.
we go home that night, and my mother looks at me and she starts laughing. I said, "What are you laughing about?" She goes, all those years ago when I told you to take St. Francis Cabrini as your saint.
Mhm.
She goes, she's the patron saint of immigrants. And what are you doing right now? And I
Yeah.
just looked there and I was like, oh my gosh. And it was like that.
Yes.
So, and
Epiphany.
I mean, not that I had read about her and I knew about her, but that right then, and I love Spanish, but I was like, I'm never going to teach anything but ESL because I just fell in
Yeah.
love with it. And I fell in love with, immigrants, and knowing that my grandparents, they did come over
Correct.
in like 1917.
Mhm.
Right when Mother died, actually, right before Mother died.
Yeah.
So that's my journey with her. And then of course, I teach English as a second language now. I volunteer in my diocese and in Catholic churches. So now all my students from Latin America, South America, they all know who she is. They'd never heard of her. We have a poster in the room, and we say our prayer at the beginning of every class, and then we say, St. Francis Cabrini, pray for us. So we're going to do a field trip to the shrine in the spring.
That sounds lovely. That
So I'm
sounds so.
going
But don't you feel like I do? I do definitely feel like the saints call us.
oh
There are
my God.
certain saints that have this incredible affinity for you and for your children in such powerful ways.
She chose me. I didn't choose her. I mean, that's
Yeah,
how.
exactly. Which is funny, and we should maybe mention this, but you can pick a boy saint for your confirmation.
Wow.
My daughter, Julia, has Saint Thomas More, and she was allowed to do that.
Yeah, well, this was 1970s. That was not allowable. You're right,
I wanted
because
to set that record straight.
yes,
So,
that's very good. That's important. I know. And when I've told a couple of young people, they're like, "What? You weren't
wow.
allowed?"
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
was like, "No, but look at how. I mean,
Well, male
huh,
saints also pick Mary as their patron,
yes,
so it's really yeah. So
Saint Maximilian Mary Kolbe. I
but
mean,
you were meant for Mother Cabrini, and that was beautiful. So tell us a little bit about her story, because it's just powerful. And then you got to see the movie. I've not seen. I've seen the trailers. It's incredible. I think it's a powerful story. For one thing, it's like in major theaters and accessible.
oh, I
And
know.
yes, to hear a Catholic saint story is powerful. So let's go into
It is.
her
So
life.
her story. So she was born prematurely in 1850, which was usually a death sentence. She was
Right.
baptized the same day, Maria Francesca. They called her Chiquina. That was her nickname, which I think is adorable.
Adorable.
And also I love that her first name is Mary, because actually my first name is Mary. So I'm Mary Monica Francis, and she's Maria Francesca Saverio, because she took Saverio after St. Francis Xavier, who was her
Mhm. Okay.
one of her heroes. And St. Francis de Sales. There are a lot of Francises in her life.
Yes.
She was born the youngest of, I think, 13 kids. Only 4 lived to adulthood.
Amazing.
Wanted to be a missionary. So when she was a little kid, heard stories about the missionaries, read about St. Francis Xavier, wanted to be a missionary. And she was so sickly. She had very weak lungs. She almost died. She almost drowned when she was 7. She was playing in the water. She was sending ships, little boats out to be missionaries at missions. And she fell in, almost died, had a lifelong fear of water, but crossed the Atlantic 25 times, and not in like the nice ships that people go in.
No, steerage probably.
She wasn't on the Titanic, although she almost got on the Titanic. Yeah, I found that out in my reading.
Wow.
So
Amazing.
that was interesting. So she wanted to be a nun, because she wanted to be a missionary nun. And she was turned down, I think, 3 times because of her health.
Yeah.
And they said, well, but you can be a teacher at this little school. So let her be a teacher. And she impressed people so much, they finally allowed her to be a nun. And
Mhm.
then soon after that, she decided that she was going to found her own order, the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart.
Mm.
And almost immediately, she just had a lot of women interested in what she was doing. So she wanted to be a missionary nun, and that did not exist. That just wasn't anything. So she, through the years, I mean, in the first, I think, 5 years of her, after her order was established, she already had convents and orphanages and schools set up in Italy. I mean, when I
That's
read her first biography, like recently, I kept thinking, must be a typo in this book. I don't know how did she, I mean, she was only in the United States for 4 months the first time she came over, and she had already started like 2 orphanages, 3 schools, and was teaching. I don't know how she did it, but I know how she
right.
did it, because Sacred Heart was with her.
Yes.
I mean, everything was about God. Everything
Right.
was about Jesus.
Everything possible through Christ.
Oh my gosh. And she was
To heart, in my weakness because she was ill. Even
right. And she was given no, I mean, everyone said you only have about 2 years to live. She was told this her whole life. She died when she was 67.
oh wow.
Yeah. So she had that kind of hanging out, but she was just like, if
Yeah.
Jesus wants me to do this work, he'll have. And she was one of the things that really didn't come through in the movie, I thought, didn't catch her personality as much, is that she was actually she was an introvert, unlike
Interesting.
me.
Yeah.
And did not get that from her. But she was very introverted. But she would do anything in the name of Jesus. She
Yeah.
would stand up to anyone.
So
And
again, it's that strength. And I think, Monica, people take that idea of introverts versus extroverts. It's like it's how they get their energy. And I
yes,
think the gift of an introvert is that they listen, they observe, they rest and gain energy. And don't you think that's like meditation? It seems like they have that more closer, extroverts like to rely on ourselves a little too much.
yeah. Well, that's why, I mean, reading, and again, I kind of read, I have a stack of books that I mean,
Yes.
these are my two favorites. Yeah, Too
Oh,
Small for the
great.
World,
Too cool
which
for the
they
world.
just,
Yeah, and that
they're
one,
republishing that.
so that is through, and I should mention this too,
Yes.
to any of our viewers that are watching this. I want you to know that Sophia Institute Press is bringing that back. It's coming out in April 9th. And what we're doing is a giveaway. We have that book, as well as they were also commissioned to have a companion book that goes with the movie.
Yes,
And
I
again,
saw
this
that.
is using a Catholic publisher to put a companion, how to read through those things. That is also, they're doing that with Angel Productions. And then they have a children's book, beautifully illustrated,
Oh.
beautiful children's story of her
Hmm.
life. So those three, we're going to have 5 copies each.
Wow.
And we're running a giveaway. It's going to be running for, and all the instructions will be below this video in there. And we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel and everything.
Great.
So
And
please,
also, I have a free lesson plan about Mother Cabrini on my website.
well,
So,
wonderful. We'll
and a
add that
review,
to the giveaway.
yeah, and a review of, it's not like an exact review of the movie, but just sort of, it was my way of, I was really excited that the movie was coming up, but I was also like, I don't want her to get lost in this movie, like the
No,
real her.
so again, the marketing things are, powerful woman, understood social justice, and unfortunately, social justice always gets a bad rap in
Right.
terms of how they twist it. But tell me a little bit about A, what did you love about the movie, and B, what did you wish they had done?
Right. So just so that people know, because I didn't really tell much about her life, but she did come to America in 1889 with 6
Mhm.
other nuns, and immediately, like literally, and within a week, had established a school. And it was at the beginning, it was all for Italian immigrants because of the horrible treatment, which is definitely portrayed in the movie. Let me just warn you, Paola, it's very upsetting. I
Yes.
think, especially if you're Italian. I told my husband, like, I was called names growing up, and I'm not that old. But he was just like, oh, come on. And then I mean, the names that they called them and the way they were treated was, and she was very, very, again, she exemplified all the virtues. I mean, I could talk about
Right. So
each
you
one
had
of the
said,
virtues in
was
my
it
program and how she exemplified it.
right? Well, you were
But like
saying you
loyalty.
led up to the point that she was an introvert, right? And you
Yeah.
said, yet she stood up to people. So who did she have to stand up to?
Everyone. I mean, you name it, the church, and that they do show that in great detail in the movie, because she did. And I feel bad for Archbishop Corrigan, because you don't really see him warming up to her by the end of the movie. And the movie only takes place in just a very short period of time.
Okay,
The
good.
first year she's there, and it's not, I mean, yeah, they don't really have her going back and forth, which she did constantly, between Italy, and then she eventually went to South America, and then Europe, and she did so many
Wow.
things. But the Pope, she was good friends with Pope Leo the 13th. And he's the one who gave her permission. In fact, he told her the big line is not to the east, but to the west, mother. Because she
Oh, wow.
wanted to go east to China. And he said, no.
Well, like Xavier,
Our
Francis.
countrymen are being treated abominably. And not only that in the United States, but they're losing their faith.
Wow.
because there were no Italian priests. They weren't allowed to sit with the other parishioners when they went to mass. They had
Wow.
to go to the basement because they said they were dirty. There was just so much going on. So she got there, and she'd been invited by Archbishop Corrigan, and then he said, I'm really sorry, but I sent a letter. You weren't supposed to come. You need to go back.
Oh,
And now
no.
she was very obedient. She definitely practiced the virtue of self-discipline. She was so disciplined. But she said to him, I'm going to stay because the Pope sent me. And you can't
Mhm.
really argue with it.
No,
You
can't.
don't argue with the Pope. So she stayed. And so that's the period that the movie takes place. Right.
Okay.
She's there. And she's, resilient. So she comes up. So he basically says, okay, you can stay, but I don't have any place for you to, I don't know where you're going to stay. And then he's like,
Right.
well, wait, I'll let you, I'll see if these nuns will take you in. So then he says to her, she's like, well, I need some money. I got some money from Italy, but I'm going to need money. He's like, I can't spare any money. But he says, you can ask for donations, but wait for this, but you can only ask from Italians. So she says, so
Wow.
the most downtrodden poor people in your city right now
Right.
are the only people I can ask for to help the most poorest and the most downtrodden.
Word. To help them.
So, but they did. If they made 5 cents, they gave her a penny, so, and then she did get the attention of some wealthy
Okay.
Italians who founded actually the Metropolitan
Well, I
Museum.
do find the poor probably are the most generous. I
Right.
remember Mother Teresa always commenting she really was so inspired by those who are without whatever they got, they were willing to let go and share.
Right. So it was really neat. So when I went to the movies, I was waiting, and I got my ticket, and I went the day it opened. Now I'd seen the trailers, and I'd read a lot, and I read the director Alejandro Monteverde also
Yeah.
directed Sound of Freedom. Bella, I've seen his movies, and I thought it was interesting because he's an immigrant from Mexico, and so he had
Right.
had a lot of feelings about this. So I went to the movies, and actually it's interesting because my brother was supposed to come with us. There's a group of us, and he couldn't come at the last minute. So I decided to invite one of my students because he's here from Venezuela and
Mhm.
he doesn't have any
Wow.
family. So we sit down, and in front of us are these 4 young women. We start talking to them. They're Italian. So the movie starts, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, I really hope they understand English. I always worry about if people are going to understand. And 40% of the movie is in Italian. I don't know if you know this.
That's
So,
so great.
so there are all these subtitles, and I'm like excited because I'm studying Italian because my Italian is not very good. My Spanish and French are much better. And
Mhm.
I'm like, oh my gosh, they're right at home. So then I turned to Carlos, my student, and he's got his little earpiece in, and he's got this special app
Wow. That translates.
that translates for him.
Wow.
So I'm thinking I'm going to have to do this the whole movie because I've taken other students to movies, and I'm doing,
Yeah, trying
translating
to
the
explain
Spanish
it.
one. So I was like, this is great. So we're watching the movie,
Amazing.
and the movie is very, you can't watch it without feeling incredible sympathy,
Mhm.
for the Italians, but anyone who's come over to
For any
country.
immigrant, I think that's the timelessness about it, because
Exactly.
there
People,
are new immigrants, and how are we treating them? Exactly.
right. And so after, watching the way they were treated and her compassion and the nuns and what they were willing to do for them. And
Mm,
Father Mike Schmitz mentions this, and I was so happy when he mentioned this because it really, really hit me. Like I started tearing up in the movie,
yeah,
was when they were making the clothing, that one of the
yeah,
nuns comes over to Mother and says, which of these fabrics do you want to use? And she says this one. She goes, but Mother, the other one is less expensive. And she said, I want them to have the best. Because what her big thing was, if you're wearing good clothes, you have dignity and you feel better about yourself. And they were being treated so horribly that they had lost all of their dignity.
right.
And this is what all ESL teachers like me try to do is, yes, we know that you don't speak English. You're not used to the culture here. And what I tell my students all the time, and my parents did a wonderful job with this with us, is I want you to assimilate to the country. I tell my
Yeah,
students this, but never lose your loyalty to your native country. Like that's who you are too.
right.
So I consider myself Italian American, and my students laugh. They're like, "You're not Italian, you're American." I'm like, I've got a lot of Italian in me." So like I tell my students, be proud that you're from the DR,
Right.
but you have to assimilate to this
Yeah.
country. You're
Well, there's
living
a
here now.
legacy. I remember the first time I went to Italy, and my immediate reaction was, now I understand. Like
Yes.
there was this, part of me I didn't understand
Yes.
till I literally was on that soil, immersed in that culture. And
Mhm.
so now I understand. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it
and I love that everyone looked like me. I was like, "Hey, everybody looks like me." I know, I was very excited the first time I went. Of course, I same thing in Spain and kind of France, but yeah,
yes.
so I think that so to me, like, obviously, I'm still teaching f immigrants.
Yeah,
So, from a very
exactly.
from a
You've got
different
the
point of
newest
view.
wave and exactly. So there's this parallel going
Exactly,
on in
and
your daily life.
right, so it's not just that she's my patron, my confirmation patron saint, and it's not just because she came from Italy like my grandparents, but it's because I am doing, so she inspired me to start an ESL program in my diocese, and I started it, and then the pandemic hit. Then I had to kind of restart. So now I'm trying to get the attention. I'm trying to get volunteers because right now I'm really the only teacher doing it, and it's very tiring.
Daunting. I
But at
imagine.
at the end of the
It is
movie,
great, is it not? And I mean, if anything, I do locally had a family that I knew that what one of the things that they commented on was that many of the children were not even baptized. Like you are assuming they're coming from these Catholic
yeah,
countries, Mexico and all, but they're not even catechized. The
no.
parents aren't catechized. The kids aren't baptized. There's there's very little resources to draw upon to help them.
Right, and I mean, that was kind of true of the Italians who were in New
Mhm.
York, in Five Points, Little Italy, Mulberry Street, and all that,
Yes.
and they were not really well catechized when they came over,
Mhm.
and a lot of them were from, like, the Southern Italy, and Mother Cabrini was from Lombardia, which is
Yeah.
in the northern part, and she they all had their little enclaves, so it's really funny because it's like the Neapolitans stuck together, Calabrese stuck together, the Sicilians, and
Right.
one of the things she did, she was so smart too. She just had such an innate sense of what was the right thing to do. Whenever she founded a hospital, which she had no intention of doing initially, but she was asked to do,
Yeah.
and she had a dream, the Blessed Virgin Mary said, a Blessed Virgin Mary doing work in a hospital, and then looked at and up and said, "I'm doing the work you won't do."
Wow.
And she was like, "Okay, I'm doing it." And she founded every hospital she found in the United States, she named Columbus. And the reason she did it, because the nun said, "Why aren't you naming them after saints?" And she said, "Because I want to unite all of the Italian paesi,
Oh,
the
yeah.
different
Yeah, from all the different regions. Yep.
all the different regions, and because they can all be proud of Columbus. And after all, he's the founder of this country." So
Yes.
she always thought, I mean, she was so intelligent, but
Wow.
with this unbelievable compassion, so much compassion for
Yeah.
her fellow sisters and for especially the immigrants. And she went down into mines in Colorado. She went to Sing Sing prison and sat with men on death row. Some of her nuns held the hands, of the people right before they were in the electric chair. That there was nothing she wasn't willing to do, as she said, if it meant it was going to bring Jesus to people. She wanted to save souls. That was her big thing. But she had so much compassion. I think a lot because she was so ill her whole life, and she really understood.
Well, like you said, she always had this like death sentence kind of for herself, saying, "Oh, you only have 2 years to live," and
Right,
in a way, it was her gift to understand. What
right,
is it, memento morti? So you're
yeah,
always thinking about your death. You
right.
live your life very differently.
I mean, when she died of complications from malaria because she'd traveled many, many places, and she
Oh
already had
wow.
weakened, lungs.
Yes.
But she was the day before, she was putting together little candy bags for the orphans because it was right before Christmas. And she heard that because it was during the war, it was
Yes.
1917.
17.
And she said they have to have candy. Kids have to have candy. So she was very practical, because she could be even a little bit stern, but she also was very playful. And
Mhm.
I mean, every one of the virtues, work, there was no harder worker than she was. She would never ask the sisters to do something she wasn't willing to do.
Wow.
But one of my favorite stories is she said, "We have to beg. I don't like it. I hate begging." And so she said, "But I'm doing it too." But the sister said that she would actually say to people, "I'm giving you an opportunity to do something wonderful. So this is a privilege, and you should be thanking me for begging you."
So great. So
That
great.
sounds just like my Italian grandmother. I got to tell you. I mean, I'm like, oh my gosh. But it's such a but she believed it. I mean, she
Yeah.
really. it was, like I said, she would have never done it if it had just been maybe just for her, but because it was for her people. And she didn't just serve Italians, she went to South America, there were Indians, and she wanted to help everyone.
So it
She made,
started with this zeal for the Lord from a young life to be a missionary, to spread the
right.
good news, and to
Mhm.
walk side by side with these people to bring Christ to them,
And just
and just spread amazing.
and
And
attracted
so the
sisters.
virtues you said.
Yeah,
So how is it something we could even just, okay, again, I'm a big believer that home education, and I like to call it more home education, uh, the emphasis on education. How do we work that this movie, this experience, this saint into the education of our children?
right. So again, I mean, the movie has it's not for little children. I wouldn't
Okay,
bring little ones, but I mean, I would
very
recommend.
raw, is it not?
Yeah, it has some scenes that are difficult. Um, I would go to see it. I've told a couple people I know who homeschool. I said, go to see it, and then decide which children can go to see it. But I mean, eventually it's going to be streamed and it'll be
Yes,
available on DVD.
yes,
I'm hoping it's going to be shown in some, auditoriums or places like
yeah.
Catholic centers or
Catholic
anything like that,
schools
because
or
that would
any
be really,
bigger, right,
oh my gosh,
venues.
it would be fantastic for high school age kids.
Okay,
Absolutely.
high school.
And on
Yep.
college campuses. But yeah, just I really think the people I know who have seen it, including my sister-in-law who's not Catholic, and I was bombarding her with texts. You got to go, you got to go. So she went with a group of her friends, and afterwards she was texting me, I just feel really motivated. I just want to do something. I want to help. And that's what is going to come from this.
Yeah.
She exhibits virtue. It's just coming out of her pores.
Yeah.
The other thing that I love is that, and that I'm encouraging, is for people to read about her after they see the movie. Now I
Okay.
know that's what I do. If I
Yeah,
watch a movie, I'm immediately like, I got to find out more, and I'm looking at it.
exactly. And so then
And
that book that that you said is being republished by
yeah,
Sophia Press, that would be awesome. A
but
good
there's so
thing.
many other books.
Yes,
There's
yes.
something like, I don't know how many books written about her, and now I think they're going to be a lot more. But yeah, so the movie, what I liked is Mother Cabrini's name is out there. And
Right.
now people, when I said that, who's your patron saint? St. Francis Cabrini, who? Now people are going to hear about it, secular and religious people, which is wonderful. They're going to hear her message, which
Right.
is love. I do agree with Father Mike. I wish more God had been in it.
Mhm.
She came out a little too feminist for me. Um,
Mhm.
was she tough? Yes. Did she have to go up against the men of her time? Absolutely. She caught a bunch of them trying to swindle her when it came to buying properties. She was like,
Yes.
I went down and I measured it, and you cut off 25 feet. She was
Yes.
unbelievable.
True.
So yes, she was in a man's world back in the late 1800s, early
Yes.
1900s. That was a time when women weren't doing that. But she comes off a little strident, in my opinion, in the movie. But it was also released on International Women's Day. That
Mhm.
was not a
Mhm.
mistake in advertising.
No, and again, all of those things, and I had this beautiful spiritual director who said, he's like, don't let the baddies win. You know what I mean? We do, women have been called from the beginning. Again, Jesus was born to a woman, who were the first women to see Jesus in the
Right,
tomb. He is elevated, and again, St. John Paul II really talks about that true identity of women, the feminine genius and all of that. So let us not let the secular world hijack the importance of women and
right,
their role to play
right,
that. And
right.
so in that sense, I totally see that, right?
Well, she says at one point, I don't know if it's just in the movies. I don't know if I've run across it in her books, but at one point that, someone says, how can you be a woman and be a missionary? And it hasn't happened before. And she said, well, if Jesus trusted St. Mary Magdalene with that very first mission, then why wouldn't you trust women to be missionaries? And I'm like, great point. And
Yeah.
in the movie, someone says to her, it's funny. She says, when I want this hospital to be built, and by the way, I only want Italian builders to be hired to do it. And this guy says to her, how do you know they can do it? And she goes, we built Rome. I think we can build a hospital. It's just this great line. It's one of those lines where you're just like, yeah. But at the end of the movie, I
Right.
think people were feeling very motivated, very excited.
Yeah.
you know, people around, and people were clapping, which I was really pleased to see. But I had my moment, you know, and I was definitely crying throughout the movie at different parts. It's very touching. And
Yes.
it was a really interesting
Very.
experience. I turned to my student and I said to him in Spanish, because his English is not great. And I said, "This is why I teach English. This is why I love my students." And he just looked at me, and we made this, and this
Mm.
is, she has inspired me to feel this strong pull to
Right.
help immigrants, so it's
That
particular for me.
circles
But
us back to the
right,
importance of what stories and who
exactly.
the heroes are for our children.
Yes, and they have to, yes, and we can never run out of saints to have as heroes, because they all have a story, and no matter where they come from,
Mhm.
we know that at the end they did what God wanted them to do, and for that they're our heroes. And she is, I really think that more and more, I think in the coming years we're going to be seeing a lot more Francis's and Francescas out there.
Yes.
Um, yeah,
Yay.
I know, I know. In fact, a woman who's bought my PACE curriculum, I sent something out to all of them, like, go see the movie, and I sent to all my customers. And she wrote and said that she's due on November 13th, the feast day of Mother Cabrini. And I'm like, you have to name, Francesca. And she's like, I'm gonna try either Francesca or Francesca. And she's I think she's Mexican.
Yeah, that's
So
wonderful.
I'm like, you got to do it.
Right.
You have the
It's
baby on the 13th.
exactly to have this incredible guide. Yes, yes. Again, another God incidence, as you say,
Right.
things. Well, Monica, like always, this is such a joy. This is such a really, really beautiful, beautiful story. And I think as we talked about the importance of the virtues,
Mhm.
your program has benefited really hundreds and hundreds of families. I hope that more and more, as I said, all these young families, please take it to heart. Remind us again, you have the PACE program. You also have workbooks,
I have
correct?
K-6 workbooks that are hand in hand with the
Companions to
original
it.
manual. And then I have these standalones that are for, junior high. And there's a third one that's classic literature and the virtues. And so that's from like 9th and 10th graders.
Right. And where can we find all of that? That's at PACE.
Yes, www.catholicpace.com.
Right. Beautiful.
And
And
again,
all the
there's
links will be at this
right.
video
And there's
uh,
my review of the movie, and encouraging
on
people,
blog there,
and
right?
my blog. And then also there's a free lesson plan that you can access on the website.
Okay,
And
that goes for the movie, the lesson plan.
no, the lesson plan is just about Mother Cabrini, about her life.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah, so it's for students. Yes. And again, I do want to make sure that I think it's really important for us to encourage these independent filmmakers, because they're going to be
yes.
making the movies that we want our
Yes.
kids and grandkids to see.
Exactly. And all those angel productions are like crowdsourced. And I'm like,
No.
yes, okay. So, again, it's coming out of that studio. And as I mentioned before, again, Sophia Press, we're running a giveaway for those books, the companion book, the reproduction of the story, and then a children's story. And so we want you the simple, whatever your aha moment from this conversation with beautiful Monica, and with any kind of key takeaways. I think there's so many. This is going to be really easy. So
Oh
eh,
yeah,
it sounds great. Well, we're going to have to do this again
I know, I know.
because there's so many other things. I love the whole thing about English as a second language, and perhaps working together on some things, resources for the Catholic homeschool community. And that's
Yes.
where you'll see me. I hang out at the catholichomeschoolcommunity.com. We're on our own platform, safe from ads. It's private. There is no trolling. It's all about community. It's about forming relationships, nothing about scrolling down and passive and making you feel really down.
Yeah.
So
There's
this
too
is
much of
really
that.
super.
There's too much of
But
that.
God bless you. Thank you
Yeah.
again. And please, again, visit Monica. You have the links to reach her, will be in her bio. And again, it's CatholicPace.com and the Catholic Homeschool Community. Until I see you again, may God bless you abundantly. Thank
St.
you.
Francis Cabrini, pray for us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you
Take
so
care.
much. God bless.